Hello berries, welcome to my 11.16 support tier list. It's been 3 weeks since we did the last tier list as Riot had a 1 week vacation, but we'll be back on the every 2 weeks being patch notes and tier list for you guys. This particular patch isn't that huge of a patch for most champions, at least anyway, but we'll have a look and we'll go in and I'll tell you my thoughts on what champions are going to be, the meta for solo queue. When we do go into the tier list, do bear in mind that it is for unranked until around about late gold, early plat, and then I have a separate tier list for plat plus. So we'll go through both tier lists at the very end. So as you can already see there, I put up on screen, there are nerfs coming into Dark Seal. If you were one of the people to take that, that Dark Seal is getting nerfed slightly, so it's looking less lucrative. I can imagine a lot of people considering not really taking it. Maybe Yumi players might still want to have a look and think about that, but I think everyone else is kind of difficult to justify taking. So I wouldn't bother with Dark Seal at all. I didn't really like the item anyway, but I know some people did pick it up, but it's definitely going to be less enticing to pick up for sure. Redemption is probably the biggest support buff this patch overall. Redemption's receiving a pretty hefty buff, not just with the heal, but also the cooldown on that is getting reduced by 30 seconds. So if you have watched my previous tier list, you know that most of the enchanters are in that tier 2 Uwu, the tier 2 Uwu tier. That buffs pretty much every enchanter. It does mean redemption is looking pretty much mandatory for second item if you don't need grievous wounds for Chemtech. So redemption's second item is going to be basically core. So yeah, it was a decent item anyway. I'm surprised it's receiving this big of a buff. It's quite a huge buff. So yeah, get ready to take that more into your solo queue games. In terms of champion nerfs in the bot lane, there's only 2 really that affect. There is the Lulu nerf, but it's not really that big of a nerf, an extra second cooldown on the W. And then you've got a little bit longer cooldown on the ultimate. She's still going to be really good with the hyper carries like Vayne, but she will basically still be dominant in the high ELOs. She's one of the best high ELO enchanters that you can take if you're Diamond Plus. If you're in lower ELO, like if you're in Silver Minus, I never really recommend taking Lulu anyway because your AD carries aren't going to be good enough to utilize the buffs that she gives. So Lulu is basically, she amplifies how well your AD carry is, and AD carries in Silver Minus are generally not good enough to utilize the attack speed buff, etc. So if you are in Silver Minus, I wouldn't really bother playing Lulu anyway. The other bot lane nerf is Ziggs. Ziggs is actually receiving quite a huge nerf. So big of a nerf that I think AP carry Ziggs in the bot lane might not be viable anymore. So Ziggs probably won't be played in the bot lane. I don't know how often that you were seeing that. It was something that I liked actually doing, but that's going to be happening less frequently in solo queue now. Champion buffs, well, we have technically no buff really for support. There is a Sona change which I'll go into in a moment, but no direct support buffs there. I would actually say that under the nerfs it says Maokai buff, but actually it's a support Maokai nerf. They're increasing his passive heal, which is the auto attack heal. However, his E, the little Pikmin thing that he throws out, the saplings, they're actually getting nerfed. The AP ratio has been nerfed by quite a decent chunk, so don't be misled. Maokai isn't actually getting buffed for the support role. It seems to be more of a top laner buff, potentially. I'm not really sure there. I think champion buff for the Maokai is pretty misleading. And yeah, that's basically it. Jhin and Sivir are getting buffs. Jarvan's support, I believe, is starting to get played a little bit. I have heard that has been played more in competitive. You could, argue that's a Jarvan support buff as well. All of those things there, buff the Jarvan support. So we could start seeing some more Jarvan support. But overall, I wouldn't really recommend it playing, particularly if you are in gold minus. So let's have a look at the Sona changes. There's quite a few changes to Sona. I will say that I haven't played her on PBE yet. I think PBE is a really bad tool in order to like get a feeling of how good a champion's going to be into solo queue. But here are some things that you need to take note of. In current Sona in 11.14, you would get increased cooldown reduction based on how many points you had on your ultimate. Now that's not a thing, it's based on how many times you land Q and W onto your allies. But they've done this smartly. So if you read through the descriptions, for example, on the Q, you'll get a stack, a cooldown reduction stack every time you damage an enemy champion with your Q. They've removed all the mana refunds as well, so the mana costs on the spells have gone down, but now you don't have to ensure that you're giving your AD carry the stack in order to get some of the mana back. So for example, like when you do a Q, you don't have to rush back to your AD carry to give them the buff from that, so to get some mana back, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. So it's quite a lot of different things going on here in terms of the cooldown reduction. I've tried to gauge some sort of indication from like Sona mains to whether or not this is going to be a buff or a nerf. I think originally they were nerfing the damage ratios, but there is no indication to say that the damage or the total damage on Sona is going to be nerfed. I think overall it seems like a slight buff to Sona. I mean, realistically, hitting level 16 in a game on Sona was pretty much impossible anyway. So this gives you a chance to get those 60 stacks on Accelerando. As before you hit level 16, it should be possible. So every time she lands an ability with her Q, or if she blocks damage with her W or heals an ally, she's going to gain 0.5 seconds on that Accelerando up to 60 ability haste, and then once you reach that, then you're reducing your ultimate's ability cooldown by 1.5 seconds. So that's like if it's on cooldown, it's then gonna like come back off cooldown a little bit quicker. So I think overall it is looking more like a buff rather than a nerf. I don't really see it changing too much. It doesn't seem that dramatic of a change. Probably the biggest change for me, honestly, is that the crescendo now hits minions as well. I actually didn't realize that it didn't actually affect the minions, but that will actually, in a laning phase situation where you do have minion aggro, the crescendo actually stunning the minions is actually going to save you and your AD carry taking about 50 to 100 damage in a level 6 fight. Just in like a full wave sensei, there's like a cannon minion as well. So that's actually like a pretty big buff in terms of crescendo, but everything else there is just kind of like whatever. So I'm not really too hyped about these changes. I don't think many Sona players are. I know Sona players were asking a lot of like changes because of Seraphine. So we have something here to play around with. I'm sure I'll do a game on her and this week or so and give my proper feedback on it, but overall not too crazy of a change. And that brings us into the tier list. If you're new to this tier list, I start at tier 5 at champions that I don't think you should be playing in solo queue, and then we're going to ramp our way up. Remember, this is for gold minus, so gold 1 minus. If you're plat or higher, I will go at the very end and show you some champions that are viable. The champions that are viable in higher ELO are slightly different to the ones in lower ELO. So you can see the usual suspects there. I'm not going to go through the entire list. Behind my head there is Nunu and Teemo. Don't play those champions in solo queue unless you want to troll. Jarvan I put down to tier 5. I don't think it is playable if you are gold minus. Feel free to prove me wrong, but I do not still recommend playing that champion. In high ELO it might become slightly more viable, but overall I just don't recommend playing that champion. Going up to tier 4, Tom Kench actually moved down from tier 3 to tier 4. He actually did receive a slight nerf, which if we go back here, his passive damage did go down and his Q healing did go down slightly, which I probably should have touched on. I don't know how many people are actually playing Tom Kench support anyway, which is probably why I forgot to mention that, but Tom Kench support is pretty honestly rare these days anyway. So it's not something that I can recommend anyway. I think he's like quite decent. He's decent-ish top, maybe not so much now after that nerf. But in the support role, it's something that I do not recommend playing. Moving up to tier 3. Tier 3, we have similar tier 3 champions as before. Honestly, after this, not much has changed. Sona, I've kept tier 3. I don't think she has changed a whole lot, but I will expect her play rate to go up just because she's got changed this patch. I'm sure more people will be testing her out and trying her out. But every other champion there is kind of like meh. I was considering pushing Rel into tier 4. She has still some nice engage when pulled off. Her play rate is abysmal, probably one of the worst champion releases in a long time. But yeah, she's still, I don't know, maybe I should move her down to tier 4. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm thinking like, yeah, no one should really probably be playing her at the moment. Yeah, consider Rel into tier 4. There you go. Breaking news, Rel to tier 4. I think every one of champion there in at tier 3 is still viable, particularly if you kind of like one trick those champions or you play them a lot, or a specific situation. For example, if you're playing with an AP carry, then the Sena's looking a little bit more interesting for you to take, but there are like some specific scenarios where you can play those champions. But overall, you should be looking to look at the tier 2 and tier 1, which we have Nami, Janna, Lulu, Seraphine, Karma, Yumi, Lux, Xerath, and Blitzcrank. Now, most of these champions here can use redemption pretty nicely, so that's the redemption buff coming through and helping out there. Highly recommend, as I said earlier, to take that item in solo queue as your second or your third item. Or basically all of those enchanters can use them really well. I think Lulu is still a decent champion to take, even if you decide, you know, she's just ultra good in high elo. She's just decent in, you know, in gold minus. Nothing too crazy. The nerfs hit her slightly, but honestly it's not that big of a nerf either, so it's still viable if that is still something that you want to do. Say your duo with a Vayne or a Cogmore or something, you guys should in theory do pretty decently still. And moving up to tier 1, we still have the same champions there as well, as nothing has really hit them. You could probably argue that Soraka probably had the slight buff in the tier 1 because of the redemption change, and she benefits from redemption quite nicely. But I think the other 4 picks there are still extremely strong, with the Nautilus and the Leona being the best engagers if you are in gold minus, and Brand and Zyra being the best AP carries if you are in gold minus. Now we'll have a quick look at the high ELOs. So if you are in Plat Plus, or you know, getting closer towards Diamond, your Plat Plus picks are still Bard, Thresh, Leona, Nautilus, Yumi, Lulu, and Zyra. So they're still exactly the same. Lulu, as I said, she got nerfed, but it's not honestly that big of a nerf. Not enough to say that Lulu is terrible to play anymore. You know, some of those champions are still the same in gold plus. So for example, if you are in gold and you are looking to climb, maybe taking something like the Leona, Nautilus, or the Zyra is probably your best bet in order to be able to climb cleanly and not have to worry about changing your champion pool too much. But hopefully this gives you a decent overview of what's going to be happening on August the 11th. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the Sona changes. As I said, I'll be trying them out. I'm not expecting a huge amount of you know, gameplay difference, but you know, we'll see once we grab our hands on her. Maybe I'll change my mind after, you know, doing a few games on her. Hope you guys enjoyed the tier list. I hope it helped you out, and if it did, make sure you leave down on the comment section down below, and like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and don't forget to stay very awesome. I'll be doing another tier list, and hopefully we get a little bit more of an interesting patch coming in 2 weeks time. Fingers crossed, because we've got Worlds coming soon, and I nearly said Blizzard. Riot like to shake things up a little bit before the Worlds patch, so fingers crossed, bigger patch, bigger support changes coming in very soon. So take care, guys.